speak. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Please note that the committee meetings of the RTD Board of Directors will be held remotely via Zoom and will be audio and video recorded. The meeting recordings, along with the unofficial minutes of the meetings, will be posted as soon as practicable on the board's website. During today's meeting, we are also providing communication access real-time translation, also known as CART. Anyone who would like to access this service should send an email to the RTD board office at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com, and a link will be provided. Additionally, the CART transcript can be automatically translated into Spanish for anyone who would like access to a live transcript of this meeting in Spanish. A live stream of this meeting is also available via RTD's YouTube page. Just a note before we begin the roll call, there is a big event happening tonight. I believe that we as directors can be adept and effective and try and complete all of the work in a timely manner, so we might attend to the debate. I would like to call the roll for the committee members. Director Bob Broom.
Present.
Director Peggy Catlin. Director Bobby Deschel.
Here.
Director Lynn Geisinger.
I'm here.
I am Michael Guzman. I am also present. Director Joyanne Rusha. Director Doug Tisdale, chair of this committee, has an excused absence this evening. I will be filling in as the vice chair. For the record, I also saw that we have board chair Director Davidson and Director Marjorie Sloan. Did I miss anybody? Okay. Let's begin with the public comment. I would like to open public comment to anyone who would like to address this committee regarding any topic listed in the published meeting agenda for the current or immediately preceding month. If you wish to speak and have not already done so, please either raise your virtual hand or press *9 on your phone. During this time, the committee will not offer any direct comments or responses. However, if you would like to be contacted regarding your public comment, please email the RTD board office at rtd.boardoffice@rtddenver.com. Are there any hands raised at this time?
Director Guzman, this is Jack Kroll, Executive Manager of the Board Office. At this time, we have one hand raised, and it is from a caller. Their phone number ends in 0670.
Okay. Staff will unmute you when it is your turn to speak. If you are dialed in, press *6 to toggle your mute settings. Please bear in mind that by participating in this process, you are being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, then your comments will need to be submitted in writing, and comments can be submitted to the board office at the following email address: rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. Speakers should begin their remarks by stating their names, and each speaker will have 3 minutes to speak. Our first speaker is the caller ending in, please say the numbers one more time.
Yep, 0670.
You may proceed. You're recognized.
Good evening. This is Director Peggy Catlin, and I was unable to participate on the Zoom call, but I was able to call in by phone. So I don't have any comment. I just wanted you to know that I was present.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Present. Just updating my notes. Sorry. Okay. Are there any other hands raised?
Vice Chair Guzman, there are no other hands raised at this time.
Thank you. Were there any comments emailed to the board office or any other communication for this evening's meeting?
There were no emailed comments in advance of this meeting.
Thank you. With no other participants in queue and no other comments to discuss, we will close the public comment period at this time. The next item on the agenda is item C, information from external entities. There are no external entity reports this evening. We can move on to item D, the update from the Revenue Diversification Working Group. I do need to address this. Both Chair Tisdale and I discussed this with the team beforehand. This item was just inadvertently left on the agenda. We will not have an update from the Revenue Diversification Working Group. It was discussed at our July meeting that the group will be pausing its work indefinitely. As such, we should not, as a committee, expect to hear updates from this group until such time as they have something substantive to report. Which takes us to recommended actions. This evening, we have two recommended actions. And the first action is for the 29th and Welton property disposition time extension. This is for the Board of Directors to extend the outside closing date to December 31st of 2024 for the negotiation and execution of all documents necessary for the disposition of the real property located at 2907 through 2915 Welton Street, Denver, Colorado, hereafter known as the property, including execution of any deeds, covenants, and other property conveyance documents. Is there a motion?
So moved, Deschel.
Second, Geisinger.
I heard the movement as Deschel and the second as Geisinger. I would like to ask Chessie Brady, Manager of Transit Oriented Development, to present this item. You are recognized.
Thank you, Vice Chair Guzman. Hello, my name is Chessie Brady. I'm happy to be back with you this evening. As noted in the action language, we are recommending a time extension on this project. Everything else is ready to go. We just need a little bit more time. So the 29th and Welton Street project is a parcel owned by RTD. It's less than half an acre in 5 Points, Denver. It was purchased in 1993 for community parking. And in 2021, the Board of Directors approved the disposition, or in this case, sale of the property for affordable condominiums. In 2022, staff selected through an open solicitation process, Shanahan Development with Elevation Community Land Trust to complete the affordable condo project. As of this point, we have an agreed upon purchase and sale agreement, meaning we're ready to close with developer Shanahan. We have set the land price at $1.5 million. Denver has approved through their zoning and other processes the site development plan. So the project is ready for building permits as soon as everything else is finalized. Denver also committed $5 million to ensure the affordability of this project, and that's the permanent affordability. The state has also committed $8 million through, and what's the last hanging piece is Denver City Council approval of $2.2 million for the Denver Urban Renewal Authority. And again, that's the last piece of financing that will send this project on its way. That approval is expected September 23rd. 2024, so in just a couple of weeks. Otherwise, beyond that last piece, this project is in great shape. It's called the Hattie after Hattie McDaniel, who was the first African-American to receive an Oscar based on the Wikipedia article that I just read. She received it for Mammy in Gone with the Wind, so a very well-known role. She was from the area, maybe attended East High School, I believe. So this recognizes her and keeps her name in the 5 Points area. This project will be 62 for sale units. They will be restricted to households making up to 80% of area median income. So what that means is that households that could otherwise get mortgages, but where the purchase price of the house or apartment in this case is out of their reach because of the inflated market in the area, because this development will bring the price down into the range that they're able to afford, they will be able to get that mortgage to afford that apartment. Then over years, they'll build equity in the project and then sell to the next family that will also have this 80% area median income level, and so that we're both building equity and also continuing to send the condominiums apartments through different families. There will also be 21 3-bedroom units in this building, which is very significant. Often most apartments or rentals are 1 or 2 bedrooms, so it's important to have these 21 3-bedrooms. It's 6 stories, it's a quality building. And we'll have 4,000 square feet of commercial space on the ground floor for activation. And the developer is also providing transit passes, which is so important to any real TOD project. Of course, this is consistent with our equitable TOD policy and helps us reach our goal of having 35% of all units on RTD land be affordable. This is 100%, so it puts us a long way towards our goal. And as far as next steps, our existing authorization expires September 26th. So we have those 3 days between when the City Council approves the DURA funding and this authorization expires. It's entirely possible we could close in there, but it's also very possible that there might be a paperwork issue or something else that would push that date just beyond the expiration date. And so we are recommending an extension to December 31st. We do not expect it to go that far, but closings on land, especially when there's so many different pieces of financing involved, can be complicated. And so we just want to have that little bit of a buffer so that we don't end up holding up this project. And hopefully it will close very soon and it can get started. So that's all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Brady. At this time, I would ask those directors who have questions or who wish to speak to raise your virtual hands, and I will call on you one-on-one. If you are calling in and you wish to speak, please remember it's *9. I see Director Bobby Deschel's hand is raised. You are recognized.
Thank you, Director Guzman. Jesse, thank you so much for the presentation. 2 quick questions on my end. One is, do they have their CHAPA financing for their HUD tax credits? And if not, sort of how are they getting around that piece to the capital stack? And then second, is this fully for an RTD ask, or is it on the developer side as well? Because I know typically it's market standard that if someone is there's typically some compensation given, and with interest rates coming off here pretty soon, the developer stands to make a pretty meaningful margin that this delay, RTD should likely be able to share in some of that upside. Thanks.
Thank you again. This is Chelsea Brady. I'm able to answer the first question, except that I forgot what it is. I'm so sorry.
CHAPA financing.
CHAPA
and HUD
financing.
tax credits.
Thank you.
Through that?
So CHAPA financing and low-income housing tax credits are for rental properties. This project is a for-sale property and so is not supported by low-income housing tax credits, which is makes it all the more difficult to finance. And then I think I heard most of your second question. So the time extension, the developer wants to get this project done as soon as possible. They want to close so that they can lock in their construction financing and everything else. But for the City Council approval, we would have closed already. But the price of the land is not going to change regardless of when we close.
Got it. Yeah, that makes more sense. I wasn't sure if it was a developer requested extension or sort of a gathering of governments extension. And it sounds like it's the latter. So nothing further on my end. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe Director Catlin would like to say something, so you are recognized. It is *6 in case you need the reminder.
Director Guzman, I think I misconveyed my message to you. I was going to let you know if she had anything to add. She's joined the call as an attendee, which makes it a little challenging for us to call upon her.
Okay.
We have to physically unmute her. So if I hear from her that she wants to add something, I'll let you know.
Great. Are there any other directors who would like to ask any questions or speak at this time? Okay, seeing none, I just thank you for the work and the clarity in your presentation and the documents. I will call for the vote at this time. Are there any no votes? I don't see any hands raised. I did not hear anything. There are 5 aye votes, 0 no votes, and 2 absent from this meeting. We'll move on to our next item. Thank you so much. The second item is for the 2025 through 2029 5-year financial forecast, also known as the FIFE. For the Board of Directors to adopt the 2025-2029 5-year financial forecast. Is there a motion?
So
So
moved.
moved. Oh, second.
All right, I heard Director Geisinger and Director Deschel as the movement and the second in that order. I would like to ask Doug McLeod, our Chief Financial Officer, and Todd Nickel, the Senior Manager of Budget, to present this item, please. You are recognized.
Thank you, Vice Chair Guzman, and good evening. So as mentioned, this is the 5-year financial forecast, also known as the FIFE. This covers the period of 2025 through 2029, and I'm joined by Todd Nickel, our Senior Manager of Budget, and would like to thank Todd for all his work pulling these numbers together and making them all fit. So in your package, you will have seen the board report, this presentation, and there's also a new item that we attached, which is a document that gives some of the assumptions that were used and some more information regarding the 5-year financial forecast, just for reference. And I'd like to point out that it's not just RTD that uses this document and this process for planning, but it's also credit rating agencies and vendors, and also our community stakeholders to showcase our community value. So this evening, just a very short presentation. We're going to talk a little bit about background, then we'll talk about the assumptions used for revenue and expenditures. We'll go through the cash flow forecasts and then talk about next steps. So regarding background, so you may recall the term midterm financial plan. That has been replaced with the 5-year financial forecast. The midterm financial plan was last approved by the Finance Committee and the board in October of 2023. That covered the period of 2024 through 2029. It was a 6-year forecast. We've changed that to 5 years. No real great reason other than to have a nice round number of years, and nobody could explain why we did 6 years. So this is a 5-year forecast, and obviously the further you go out, the less certain a forecast becomes, so it made more sense to move to a 5-year forecast. This action item that we're requesting is also in support of the strategic financial planning item of financial success. It establishes the 2025 budget baseline. And also for planning purposes, it also lays out and helps us plan not only for financial resources to be fiscally sustainable, but also to plan out as an agency what other resources we need, the human resources involved, timing for lead time for procurement, et cetera. And just as a reminder, unlike the budget, this is not an appropriation. So this recommended action is really to approve this into the records of RTD. We do this once a year. It provides information to the board as well as the community and our employees regarding what we see based on current information regarding our financial forecasts. It's not an appropriation or an establishment of funding for any particular items. That will come in October when we present at this committee the proposed 2025 budget as a discussion item. So moving into the assumptions. So this first slide is all surrounding our funding coming in, so all of our revenues. So what you'll see when we go through the cash flows, we've included modest fare increase, revenue increases, and that is not, we're not assuming a fare increase itself. So the fares are still going to be $2.75 for our flat fare throughout the 5-year period. The increases simply come from assumptions in growth in ridership that's driving that. We've also included a TABOR refund provision. You all know that we have the Tabor ballot initiative to try to remain de-Bruced. That will be voted on in November of this year. What we're assuming in this forecast is to be the most conservative possible in all of our assumptions, both revenue and expenditures, to where we're not assuming that that ballot initiative may pass. So what I'll show you is we have some assumptions in there for a decrease in revenue, assuming that Tabor refunds will in fact occur. The sales and use tax is our biggest revenue source. We are using the most recent forecast that RTD has received from CU Lead School of Business, and that came from March of 2024. This body will be presented next month in October with a revised forecast for September, yes, it's September. So in October, a revised forecast will be presented to this body. But for now, and those numbers will be used in the budget. However, for now, we're using the March 2024 sales and use tax forecast. Grants is our second largest source of revenue. So we only assume a portion grant. So in this case, it's mainly Section 5307 preventive maintenance grants that are awarded by the Federal Transit Administration. Those approximate $150 to $160 million a year, so a sizable chunk of money, but we don't assume any other grant funding until we know it's certain. So again, being very conservative. And I'd just like to point out that Senate Bill 230, oil and gas fees, we have not included any revenue for that. Again, being conservative on the revenue side and being conservative on assuming higher expenses to the extent possible on the expenditure side. And one final item, you'll notice we do have large fund balances. We've been very adept at pulling that money in from grants and other sources and getting it invested right away, trying to get as large of a yield as we can while maintaining safety and liquidity. As those balances are used, and I'll show you in the fund balances, as we use those to maintain primarily a state of good repair, we'll get smaller investment yields. Not a huge dollar amount, but still significant enough to warrant discussing. On the expenditure side, so what we've done on the, we've built all of the expenditures, the operating expenditures and all the supporting expenditures around the comprehensive operational analysis, which leads to the system optimization plan. So we're still planning on meeting that system optimization plan and have forecasted accordingly. Capital expenditures is one of the large items, lots of discussion over the last couple of years of just maintaining the assets that we do have in the system that we do have. I would point out last month, in July, during the Finance and Planning Committee, we did give a presentation, a discussion item about the 5-year financial forecast. And you might remember we had 3 different generations or phases that we're going through as we implement a new financial planning process or an enhanced planning process. One of those items is continuing to gather more information on the inventory of assets and condition assessments. So we're not completely there, but that's a long period, as you can imagine, with $9.3 billion of assets and all their components and gathering the information about their usage and their wear. So that's still an ongoing process. We'll have more about that with the budget presentation. The other thing I'd mention, I'll point this out in the cash flows, is we still plan on cash funding everything, meaning that we'll use cash on hand to pay for any capital expenditures rather than financing. In the past, particularly not just with infrastructure projects, large infrastructure projects, issuing bonds for those projects, which is a good way to pay for things, just like you would with your house. We've also bought equipment with certificates of participation. We also built the end line with certificates of participation, which is a collateralized loan. So we still have that option available to us as an agency to issue COPs. We do not have bonding authority anymore without going to the voters. But if the necessity arises that we do need additional funding, we can always switch over to a financing mechanism to buy some of these longer term assets. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit about fund balances. What you'll see in the cash flows through the 5-year period through 2029 is that we forecast that we will continue to meet the fiscal policy requirements. And I'll touch on each of those. So these next 3 slides, we'll talk about the base system, which is the 6/10 sales and use tax that we collect. And then the 4/10, we'll have a separate slide. Fast Tracks will have its own slide. And then we'll have a combined looking at the entire agency as a whole. So for the base system, there's a lot of numbers here. So I'm going to refer to the blue numbers over on the left by row number for some of the items that we wanted to point out. And I would just also like to mention once again that the base system can provide funding to fast tracks, but based on the 2004 voter authorization, fast tracks money cannot be used on the base system with one exception, which is to provide bus feeder service to the fast tracks lines. So just beginning on the top line, I won't do this over and over for each one, but just to show you the fares are increasing modestly year over year, and that's based on ridership. No fare increases. There are fares on fast tracks and there are fares on base. Total, they accumulate to only about 5% of RTD's revenue, so a relatively small amount. The item that I mentioned about the Tabor refund is shown on line 2, and you'll see this on each of the slides. A portion belongs to base system and a portion belongs to fast tracks, because it's only the fast tracks 4/10 sales and use tax that is exempt from Tabor going forward through 2050. All their other revenues, non-federal revenues, are subject to Tabor growth limitations, including fare revenue as well as investment income, for example. So sales and use taxes, I should say on the Tabor refund under current projections based on work from the Revenue Diversification Working Group. Based on our current projections, we don't anticipate doing a Tabor refund until possibly 2027. And then again in 2029. And that's just because of the way the Tabor calculation works regarding inflation plus change in property tax values. Now that could change significantly, certainly if inflation changes or if our tax revenues change significantly. But within the sales tax revenue forecast from March, it's really a fairly progressive growth throughout this period of about 3 to 5% per year, which is below inflation. Which is why you're not seeing a Tabor refund except for those 2 years, and they're very small. These numbers, by the way, are in thousands. So that first Tabor refund in 2027 really represents 1,544,000. Moving down, I'd like to point out one anomaly that sticks out. We've discussed this also in the assumptions document, is on row 4, grants and contributions. So you'll see that in 2024, the projected grants are 310 million. Those drop down back to our normalized amount of about 160 million per year going forward. The reason for the 310 million in 2024 is you may recall that we budgeted for a pass-through grant for Colfax BRT. So that's money that's coming to RTD as a direct recipient of federal grants, and then going right back out to City and County of Denver to make those enhancements to the Colfax corridor. Another item I'd like to point out is capital expenditures on row 14. So again, you'll see some big fluctuations there. Number 1 in 2024, again, that's the projected column, then the 5 is the next 5 columns. So the projected year end is really the budget with a few adjustments based on experience throughout this current year. But the budget for 2024, capital expenditures of 185,460,000. That includes the downtown rail reconstruction project of 150 million. That's why that number is so large. But generally, we can expect somewhere on the order of 50 million per year in capital expenditures. But this is really our transit asset management plan. So each one of these years, the funding is timed to do replacements when the TAM, Transit Asset Management Plan, indicates that is warranted. And I just point out in 2027, the number shoots way back up to 207 million. That's due to scheduled bus replacements during that year. So you'll see that number fluctuate, and I'll talk about fund balances and how we support that and still maintain cash funding for these items. Another item to point out is row 15. What you can see with debt service is it drops off precipitously going forward. You may recall that's why we will be subject to the Taxpayer Bill of Rights revenue growth limitations. Is in November of this year, the last payment on the base system debt will be made. And then really the only debt that's held by RTD on the base system side past that is certificates of participation for equipment purchases. So that's a big decrease, and you'll be able to see when we talk about fund balances why that's the main contributor to the growing financial success on the base system. So finally, I'd just like to touch on the reserves. So the way this is laid out is rows 1 through 7 are revenue, rows 8 through 16 are expenditures, money coming in, money going out, and then what's left over is down in rows 18 through 22. That's really an indicator of our fiscal health and our financial position. So we've broken that down according to the policy, the fiscal policy that has primarily 4 different fund balances where we categorize funding for specific uses that the board has indicated. So number 1 is the operating reserve in row 18. That's a 3-month operating reserve. So the board has set forth the requirement that we maintain 3 months of operating expenses in reserves. That's to be used for any shocks, any economic shocks we may encounter, or any emergencies, as the board has decided. Because we're so susceptible to economic swings with 70% of our revenues coming from sales and use taxes, if residents of the district stop spending, it could create a problem for us, but we have these reserves to fall back on. So we're maintaining those 3 months of reserves throughout the 5-year period. Capital replacement fund. So that fund really supports the notion of trying to maintain a cash funding position rather than incurring more expensive debt to pay for things where we have to pay interest on that debt. So what we're doing is we're building up that capital replacement reserve over the 5-year period. And what you don't see is once we get beyond 2029, RTD is going to continue to replace and repair and reconstruct assets as they become older, needing replacement. So there will be some fairly large needs, including replacing buses, et cetera. So we're trying to build up that fund so that we have the ability to cash fund at least for a period beyond 2029. And we haven't really forecasted too far out past that. So that's what the intent of that capital replacement reserve is. And in turn, what we're doing is as we build up that capital replacement reserve, we're pulling down the unrestricted reserve. That's an undesignated reserve. It's really the general fund money that's left over. So we're trying to put money into the fiscal policy funds, the capital replacement operating reserve on the base system, and use up that excess money again so that we don't have to borrow money. But bottom line, you can see on line 22, our total reserves continue to grow throughout the period. And even though we have FISA reserve on here, it doesn't apply to the base system. I'll talk about that on fast tracks. So good story financially, fiscal sustainability on the base system going forward. I won't spend as much time on this slide, just hit some major items with fast tracks. So fast tracks is a little bit different in terms of their fund balances. So a couple items to point out is essentially all the revenues follow the same process that the base system did, and there are revenues applicable to Tabor, which are a little bit different in terms of the amount of sales and use taxes and the fares that are allocated based on the types of modes that fast tracks provides versus majority of bus and light rail on the base system side. So again, you can see on line 2, Tabor Reserve, there's a portion that, or Tabor Refund, there's a portion that would be attributable to the 4/10 separate entity of only $862,000 in 2027 and $1.3 million in 2029. So we're accounting for those in the right buckets, at least at this point. I'll just jump down to debt service, which is on row 15. So what you can see there, I showed you how the base system is being paid off. When RTD issued all the debt for fast tracks, the large build out of fast tracks, it was structured in a manner that for many of the first several years that only interest would be paid. The reason for this was because as an entity, when you combine base and fast tracks, is the overall debt service, we wanted to maintain that at a fairly level amount when you add base and fast tracks together. So some of the principal payments on fast tracks were delayed a few years until the base system could pay off its own debt, thereby freeing up cash flow to help support fast tracks if necessary. And that's in keeping with knowing that we couldn't have done the opposite way because fast tracks cannot use money for base, but the reverse is true. So you can see the debt service is increasing from 177 million in 2024 all the way up to 254 million by the end of the 5-year period. So that's a significant constraint on fast tracks, obviously. Moving down into the operating reserve. So on row 18, it shows 52,850,000. We just kept that number the same. It's still 3 months in every year, but because of the fluctuations up above in the cash flow, we just wanted to demonstrate that every year we're meeting that. In some years we have a little bit more, but we kept it flat at 52,850. And then moving down, let me just jump to row 21, and this is where one of the issues comes in regarding finances. So we're using up that unrestricted reserve, same with base system, but we're not using it to move it into a capital replacement or other fund, right? So we're using that funding up, and a lot of it's to go to pay off debt service. And one of the primary reasons, as you can see in row 20, the Fast Tracks Internal Savings Account, or FISA, that is scheduled to be funded over, in perpetuity, essentially. And it's based on a schedule that was put together back in 2013. Now, the FISA is a board directive to try to set money aside from certain sources to complete additional Fast Tracks projects. But what's happening, as you can see, it's going from 190 million in 2024 up to 260 million. So a $70 million increase. So that money's got to come from somewhere. So any excess money is going into that. We're building that up at the expense of pulling down the unrestricted reserve. So I think the important thing to take away is we can still maintain the operating reserve, but the rest of the funding available is as would appear here. And the last thing I'll point out is because that is occurring in row 13, in order to maintain this 52,850,000 operating reserve, it's projected that the base system will have to provide $26,576,000 of funding to the Fast Track system, just based on the way this math is working. And again, it's a forecast, so it's going to change. But I think the big takeaway here is that the fund balances for Fast Tracks are decreasing on row 22 from 476 million down to 242. And if we're taking what's left of that 242 and putting it in certain buckets, in order to maintain those reserves, it's going to require funding from the base system. Okay. So the final slide that I have is just to show what this looks like on a consolidated basis when you add base system and Fast Tracks together. Still a good picture. We're maintaining reserves. I'll just go right to the bottom line. Total available reserves on row 22, 993 million, a relatively small decrease down to 848 million. Still very solid position. Much of that money is going as planned to maintaining our system, doing state of good repair work and maintaining according to our TAM. Again, we're meeting all of the fiscal policy requirements based on this forecast. So we've got the operating reserves. We're maintaining the expectation that we target to only cash fund items. We've set up the capital replacement reserve for long-term resiliency on the financing, and then burning up some of the unrestricted reserve just to maintain our system. The last thing I'll point out is that bottom line there is another item that we have in our fiscal policies, that we target a net revenue coverage ratio of 1.2. So net revenue coverage from a borrowing perspective or a credit rating perspective is basically taking all of your revenues minus your operating expenses, and then what's left over, comparing that to debt service. And what we said as an agency, I mean, typically just to break even, you'd want that to be a 1. You'd want enough money left over after operating expenses to pay every dollar of your debt service. We've been a little conservative, and we've represented and included in our fiscal policy that we want to be at 1.2 times to have a little bit of cushion there. And you can see in every year we're exceeding that 1.2 times coverage based on this forecast. So I think those are the highlights. I just have one more slide just to talk about next steps. Just as a reminder, in October, at the October 8th, Finance and Planning Committee will bring the first look at the budget, the 2025 proposed budget. That will be a discussion item. There will be additional information, as was discussed with the Finance and Planning Committee last year. We'll have a full package, and that budget will be substantially final. State law requires that we post that budget for public inspection by October 15th. Then we'll come back in November and ask for a recommended action to approve the 2025 budget, which would be in effect on January 1st. So, Mr. Vice Chair, that is all I have for this presentation, and Todd and I would be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. At this time, I would ask those directors who have questions or wish to speak to raise your hands. I will call on you. If you are on telephone, please toggle to raise your hand *9. I do see Director Broom's hand was raised. You are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question on the sales tax from vehicle sales. I wonder if you could comment on the level. Is it going up or down? And then secondly, there's a lot of grants being given to people when they buy a EV. Is the sales tax calculated before the grant or after the grant? Thanks.
CFO McLeod.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. I'm hoping that Todd is looking at our industry sales by type of sale, because we have several different vendors. So I'll ask him in a second if he can give us information regarding vehicle sales. But certainly we do get vehicle sales. We actually get those reported to us from the Department of Motor Vehicles each month, in addition to the Department of Revenue, which reports and collects all of our other sales taxes. So Todd, I hate to put you on the spot. This might be something we have to get back to you on, but Todd, do you happen to know how those are looking?
So this is Todd Nichols, Senior Manager of Budget. And from a year-to-date standpoint, I really can't off the top of my head. We did get our sales tax for July in today. And compared to last July, new car sales were down 8% in our collections. I did look at used car sales. And in terms of if the sales tax is calculated before a grant or a rebate, I'm not familiar with that to answer that question. But auto sales year to date for July compared to last year in July, we're down 8%. I could look at the year to date and get that information for you tomorrow, if that would be okay.
That'd be fine. Thank you. I won't take any more time.
Thank you, Director Broom, for your question. Your hand is still raised, just so you know. Director Deschel, your hand was up next. You are recognized.
Thank you, Vice Chair Guzman. Question maybe for Doug, maybe for Jack Kroll, which is, what is the board's and our ability to amend the 5-year plan for something around the FISA as presented? Are we allowed to do a line item? Hey, FISA shouldn't be funded at that level because it's eating away at our actual ability to run the transit agency. What is our sort of wiggle room there?
Mr. Kroll.
I'll defer first to CFO McLeod, and if there's anything substantive I can add, I'll follow up.
Thank you. Mr. McLeod.
Thank you. Great question. And yeah, what we'd request is, based on these numbers, that the FISA, we're requesting a recommended action, and it is a forecast. What I would recommend is going forward that the board potentially discuss the FISA and what the policy should be for that going forward, because we can always update the FISA, but without knowing what that might look like. I would suggest that we have that discussion and we can go into more detail about what's going in, what's coming out, and then make an informed decision by the board on how we restructure our fund balances. And incidentally, we will be bringing the fiscal policy to the board in October for approval. That includes things like provisions for TABOR refunds, et cetera. So I believe there's some time, and we can come back with the fiscal policy and amend it any time. So if that's something we want to address over the coming months, I would recommend that we maybe do that, especially after the election with the TABOR ballot initiative, and possibly readdress any changes that the board may want to make to the fiscal policy, which would drive changes to the numbers, and we can restate those.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. I think that makes sense to put that in the fiscal policy of, funding FISA only to the extent, should the extent the board and committee agree that it doesn't harm the agency. And on the TABOR refund numbers, is the cost, who administers? Obviously, most TABOR is refunded based on a property tax, which is much more straightforward than refunding based on a sales tax. For example, finding the tourist who came and bought a bottle of water at Union Station, who paid in cash, may be a challenging effort to get that individual their money back. Is the cost of administering the TABOR refund, does that fall to RTD? Does that fall to the state? And is the cost of doing it included in the refund number? or is the agency expected to additionally come out of pocket in order to administer that refund?
Mr. McLeod.
Thank you. My understanding, and I'd ask General Counsel to correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that all the costs are borne by the agency doing the refunding. I don't know what that might look like. And as you saw with the current projected TABOR refunds, those are small enough with $3.1 million or 3.1 million residents within the district. And to your point, it's much more complicated to do a carve out for the district and try to find people who actually spent the money than it is to do a statewide refund, where I believe it's based on whoever submitted a tax return gets $750 or $1,500 back. So that would require some additional discussion, but based on the size of those refunds, when we're talking about potentially $2 million combined in refunds in 2027 spread over 3.1 million residents. And I'm not even sure if that's how you do it or based on taxpayers, because you could have a family, for instance. So it would be relatively small. So probably what we would recommend to the board is doing something like free fares or something to pay that, return that money to the taxpayers in substance. If it was something larger, we'd have to talk about what that looks like and how do we produce those checks. But I think it would really be a coordination with the Department of Revenue and how do we facilitate that.
Great, that makes sense. And hopefully it's not something we have to, may never come to be, but you know, it's an interesting intellectual exercise. Nothing further from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Deschel. Director Geisinger, I did see Eric's hand shoot up really quickly. I don't know if he wanted to address something in that question. Okay, sorry, just making sure. Director Geisinger, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair. And thank you, Doug and Todd, for all this work. That's great. I noticed in that the language says that you're only including source and use projections with reasonable certainty to occur. And the two big ones, of course, you pointed out are the SB 230 oil and gas fees and the TABOR refund. What happens? I mean, refund we'll know in November, I guess, and the oil and gas fees, I guess, I don't know if you know at this point what constitutes reasonable certainty, but when you do you amend this FIPE at that point, or what do you do?
Go ahead, Mr. McLeod.
Thank you. Great question. And we certainly could. What I would propose is if it's material to the outcome of that projection, that we would come back to the Finance Planning Committee and demonstrate what that might look like with the added results potentially of the ballot initiative. If there's substantial changes, we'd certainly bring that back and report that to the board, get this committee's input, comments, et cetera. I believe, so one of the things with the new potential fees, one of the reasons why we didn't include that is because we're not certain what the sizing of that looks like or the timing at this point in time. Didn't want to speculate and include that. That's why we're being conservative. In addition, obviously, if that money comes in, it will be expended on something. So it'd almost be an offset regardless. So it probably wouldn't have much effect on our fund balances. There would be an expectation if we're getting oil and gas fees coming in that money would be expended on something. But yeah, I mean, from a gross basis, we would want to come back if that was material and present it to the committee and what that looks like.
Okay, thanks so much. And then you have the generation 1, 2, and 3. Is that, it looks like sort of a to-do list. Is that the what that is? And it says it's 2024 through 2077. When would you expect to have the generation 1 items completed?
Thank you. I'll go ahead and answer that. So yes, what we want to do is through this budget period, this budget cycle, October and November, we would want to have the majority of those items in place, including additional information about the transit asset management plan to provide to the Finance and Planning Committee, additional narratives in terms of by department, as well as just more general information to be more informative. So those are the easy ones that we can do up front. So it's really going to be those substantial types of substantive things that we can present to the board with the budget this year. The generation 2 and 3 will spill into the next couple of years, and those are more behind the scenes type of things, like maturing our TAM information. As we go through the rail reconstruction project, as they're pulling up rail, we get good information about what's the condition of embedded track versus above ground track, and we're really going to use that information going forward to really evaluate, do repairs and replacements in the future throughout the system. So that's more of a longer term project. Another thing that comes with generation 3, throughout generation 2, we're going to be refining our processes as well regarding business justifications or business cases for individual projects. We've had that in the past, but we want to go into a little more depth, and also we're expanding that throughout the agency, where in the past what's happened is where we've gotten requests, they've come from several different areas within the agency, different departments. And I think one of the visibility things that we've been lacking throughout the year is not having those interdepartmental discussions until right before the budget is put together. Then we all come together and discuss, all right, what are we going to work on? What do we have the resources available to do? So that's going to be an ongoing cycle throughout the year. And then generation 3 is just making further refinements and possibly getting software to help with more project planning software that takes into account not just when things need to be replaced, but it also would be able to compare projects amongst each other. Like you may have a project that takes 1 year versus one that takes a month, but the one that's a month has been prioritized down the road because it's not as important, but it'll help us really to evaluate resources, and should we just knock out the 1 monther and start working on the 1 year project at the same time. So that's where I think we can really get some added benefit to our planning process, which will be a longer term situation.
Great, thanks so much.
Is that everything, Director Geisinger?
That is.
Thank you so much. Director Davidson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Mr. McLeod, thank you for the work here and for presenting this, as always, very clear, very helpful. Also delighted to see, again, that movement on net coverage and our debt service coverage ratio. So again, thanks for the work that's gone into getting us to that point. I have one kind of a two-part question based around where our sales and use tax are currently. I believe, I double checked, but I believe the FIFE is contemplating using the mid scenario that were presented by CU Leads for sales and use tax. Okay, I see the nodding. And so, but what's interesting is with this year, I think we're down 6.7%. At least we were going in August on year to date to budget, and we're actually trending closer to the low scenario, which I think is somewhat reflected in the 2024 number here. There's kind of two things I'm wondering. I think one is, how do you think about that when you're looking at the multi-year, what might be an adjustment down, and, do we start to adjust to the low? So might we see that, for example, in 2025, that we lower the budget expectations depending on where we finish this year? That's kind of part one of just how do you think about that in the multi-year plan. And part two is, do you see any concerns if we do trend towards the low side in 2024, but we go back to the mid, that could introduce some adjustments to some of our Tabor math by way of the ratchet down. So have you seen any concerns with that? Have you talked about that? I just would be curious to get a little bit of context around where we sit right now, late in the year and trending closer to the low end. But as we're planning for the mid, would love just some context on that if you might. Thank you.
CFO McLeod.
Thank you. Great questions. So regarding lower budget expectations with sales and use tax, so we have a few levers we can pull that we can adjust certainly on the short-term basis. Some of those include, not making certain expenditures. The last time we went through, when we were facing the COVID uncertainty and we were very uncertain as to what our sales and use taxes would look like going forward. Fortunately, they came back much better than what was expected. Some of the things that we can do just on the surface is reduce discretionary spending, which has an impact. So if it's relatively small, there's certain discretionary spending things we can do to delay those costs or cut out certain costs we could delay projects, for instance, that aren't critical, that would save money until we got into a better place. And we can certainly use some of our reserves. What we've experienced a lot in the past is when the board appropriates our expenditures for the year, we typically underspend those amounts because of a variety of reasons. There's things that are very certain. We have contractual increases in contracts that we know about, and then we have to estimate based on certain other initiatives. For instance, there could be reasons why those don't get off the ground or they get delayed. We focus our resources elsewhere. But one of the things we're trying to do in this financial planning improvement process is get our variance down. We have typically about a 10% underspend on our operating expenses each year historically. So that amounts to about, $60 to $70 million. Those numbers, I think we can probably tighten up. There's opportunity, there's some cushion there for us. But within these numbers here that we're presenting, those are conservative again on the expenditure side. So they're probably inflated over and above where we could really be if we just were kind of austere without, digging into or punishing, our actual operations, et cetera. I think the last gasp after we did some of those adjustments to discretionary spending, delaying projects, potentially using some of our reserves would be to start reducing other expenses. And that the last thing that anybody wants to do is reduce operating expenses past the point of, easy opportunity, low hanging fruit. So certainly that would be a discussion if we started seeing that trending down to where we were concerned about it. General Manager Johnson and I would certainly discuss with the board, okay, what are we going to do? The great thing is with the reserves that we have enough time to weather that storm and not make any rash decisions, only for it to recover and have to put things back. So I think we're in a good place financially from that perspective, that we can make good strategic decisions if we come under any financial constraints. Second question, if it trends lower and then goes back up regarding Tabor, that's a great question just because CU leads, when they provide their forecast, it's really, as you know, very methodically moving up over a long-term basis, and they don't forecast recessions. They don't forecast any big blips. It's pretty straight line going forward. So if that were to occur, that would be certainly something that we'd want to discuss and how to deal with that. One of the things we put in the fiscal policy is I think we'd be experiencing that and be able to set money aside to do Tabor refunds so that we weren't spending that money only to 6 months later have to refund it and have to figure out where that money's coming from. So I think we would be a little bit strategic in how we plan for those things, but certainly it would come into play with the Tabor calculation. What we're seeing through July, Todd mentioned we got the July tax numbers today. And we're still in that trend where we're 6.7% below budget, which is almost $35 million. So we're below budget this year. Our expenditures are below budget too, so it's kind of a wash. But year over year for the first 7 months, if we compare to 2023, we're 0.1% over $589,000 over where we were at the same time last year. So it's really flat. So we're not meeting where we thought we would be, but we're not seeing a large decrease at this point. So hopefully that answered your question kind of a roundabout way.
Director Davidson, is that?
It does answer it. And just to echo back and just maybe a quick confirmation. So I think what I hear you saying is, yes, we're going with the mid. Even if we're trending down, we're not too worried about that because we're conservative on the expenditure side. So in theory, slight adjustments down is kind of a wash, and we have then the flexibility of reserves there. And then on the Tabor aspect, this will factor into fiscal policy decisions the board would make around, how the risk tolerance of, what happens with a dip and a recovery. Have I kind of echoed that back properly? Great. Yeah. Thank you, Vice Chair. Appreciate it.
No,
thank you.
And thank you for that. And the only thing I'd point out too is, yeah, we've almost always used the mid. There was a period of time 3 or 4 years ago where we did a combination of the mid and the low. I think it might have been for the actual, we shortened the midterm financial plan with COVID, and we also used the lower forecast based on revenue. I think that was the circumstance. There's such a gap between the mid and the high and the low that I think we would be constraining ourselves too much if we use the low and have to actually reduce the operating costs. If we went with high, I think that would be much too optimistic and get ourselves in a bind. But certainly, yeah, it's a policy decision that we would want to discuss with this body to make sure that, hey, we're seeing some dark clouds on the horizon. Maybe we should implement a lower sales and use tax forecast before we ask you to appropriate the funding associated with that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I want to circle back to something. Mr. Kroll, you said you have the fiscal policy available to discuss the FISA. Did you want to bring up that information?
Yeah, just to put a finer point on what CFO McLeod stated earlier, I think the best way for you all to address anything with respect to the FISA, as was discussed previously, is to hold a conversation specific to that. And the best way to effectuate any change would be through your fiscal policy. The fiscal policy with respect to fund balances states as follows: the Fast Tracks internal savings account will be used to provide funding to complete and operate additional Fast Tracks projects. Expenditures from the FISA will be subject to board approval. Funding of the FISA will be approved by the board. So really the 5-year financial forecast is just that. It's a forecast, it's not an appropriation. You're not going to actually fund the FISA for next year until you pass your budget for this year.
Okay.
And each subsequent year thereafter.
Thank you. Director Sloan, you had your hand up, then it went down, then it went back up. Do you have a question before I return to Director Deschel?
No, I was really interested in all the Tabor related questions, and they were mostly asked. To me, it seems like the bottom line is for individual taxpayers, nothing will happen until 2027 and 2029, and it will be minimal. However, it is meaningful revenue to the agency and will also require additional planning, so very long range in terms of most family planning, but medium range or maybe short-term range for RTD planning.
Thank you.
That's all.
Great. Director Deschel?
Thank you. Appreciate the second bite here. My question is on this 5-year financial plan, or 5-year financial forecast. Do we include operating expenses to match the plans and studies that we've shown to the public, such as the system optimization plan, the mobility plan for the future, the vehicle clean transition plan that I know is still in the works? And if we don't, can we sort of touch on why? Because I think that might be a pretty big mismatch between the policy that as a board and as a community we're showing to people with the finances that come back to either support or not support it.
Was there somebody that was directed to specifically?
Whoever wants to take it and just to better understand that one.
I can take that, Mr. Vice Chair.
Mr. McLeod?
Thank you. Yes, so on the expenditure side, like I said, we're conservative in that respect, and that we try to include everything that we know of, including partnership programs, et cetera. So those are all embedded in those numbers. And what we do typically is we use, here's our current, so you saw the projected column for 2024, that's based on budget and what our current experience is through this year, and we try to project through the end of the year. That's kind of our starting point. Then we add on to that things like inflationary factors, known changes that we're going to do. So for instance, one of the things that you're all aware of is we're working towards a system optimization plan through our comprehensive operational analysis, where we're not quite there yet due to staffing shortages and other things. We've built those in each successive year. So we try to account for all of those things based on those known factors. So yes, we do include those.
Got it. So it's reasonable for someone in the public to look at this and say, okay, if RTD's funding is at this level, the system optimization plan should be fully funded.
Yes. Yes, and it's really, based on current information. Of course, that could change a week from now.
Right. CBA, et cetera,
Right,
is all still.
But yeah, and I think because it's conservative, it's a pretty reasonable estimation. And to Director Sloan's question, she pointed out the refund in 2027 and 2029. Those are just projected, so that too could change certainly. And RTD would be subject to Tabor beginning in 2025. So potentially a refund could happen in early 2026 once all those numbers are finalized. So a lot of changes there. And if something changes dramatically, we'd certainly want to talk to the Finance and Planning Committee about what that looks like, what policy changes, what we should do moving forward.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Geisinger?
Thank you very much. And you sort of just referred to this, Mr. McLeod, but the Tabor numbers that we're looking at now, as you said, don't assume any sort of recession or significantly lowering of our sales and use tax or additional state funding coming in or anything like that, right?
Correct.
Because those things would make a big difference. Okay, thanks.
Is that everything?
That's everything.
Great. All right. I don't see any more hands raised. Just checking with the board office staff. Is there, since Director Catlin was on the call, has she chimed in at all?
She has not. She had to drop off the call and appreciated that CFO McLeod presented this item as a planning exercise and not an appropriation.
Great. Thank you. I would like to call for the vote at this time. Just a quick time check for everybody. It is 6:38. So are there any no votes on this action? I do not see any, which I believe we're at 4, correct? So that would be 4 aye votes and 0 no votes, with 3 absent from the committee. Okay, we have 1 item left. It is my hope that we can wrap this up pretty quickly so that we can get on with our evenings. Thank you for your great questions and conversation. This is a discussion item only. We're not taking any action here. And so we have 1 updated item listed on the agenda, and that is our discussion for the 2025 investment policy. I would like to ask CFO Doug McLeod and Brendan Morgan, Senior Manager of Debt and Investments, to present this item.
Thank you. Yeah, very briefly on this one, there are really no substantive changes to this policy. This is a discussion item. This investment policy we will bring back to the Finance and Planning Committee on October 8th, along with the fiscal policy, 2025 fiscal policy, and ask for approval of those policies. Again, these could be changed at any time. There have been no statutory changes, no investment industry changes that would impact this policy over the past year. So what we've included in here are really just minor grammar changes. So it's being presented in that vein. And you also note that in the board report, we did mention too that as a follow-up to the Revenue Diversification Working Group, we are looking as an agency. Brendan Morgan, Senior Manager of Debt Investments, is working on looking at if the juice is worth the squeeze in terms of changing the policy that we fall under for statutes. There's a general policy for investment limitations that government agencies can do within Colorado, but there's certain carve-outs for things like schools, higher education schools with their endowments. We're just kind of looking at that to see if there's some opportunities that would benefit RTD. But again, safety, liquidity, yield in that order is what we're going for as an agency. We want to protect the investment through safety. We want to make sure it's liquid so we can have the money available when we need it. And then yield's a secondary concern. So this is kind of an aside project, but it may create some opportunities, and we would return to the board if that looked like it was going to bear fruit. So that's all I have, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to affirm that this is mostly clerical update to this document. I have reviewed it. There's literally 1 word that has been changed, which makes more sense. And the rest of it is really just changing numbers. The policy does remain the same as it was in the previous years with no major changes. So are there any questions, any comments on this at this point from directors on the meeting? Director Davidson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I just simply want to say, Mr. McLeod, Mr. Morgan, thank you for taking a look at that and bringing that forward. And Mr. Kroll, thank you for sharing your experience as well with the Revenue Diversification Working Group based on your work with the region. So I just want to say thank you for looking at that, and we look forward to hearing an update. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Just one question for you, CFO McLeod, and that is, do you need any direction or any other feedback from this committee about this item?
No, thank you. It was really just a discussion item. If there were any questions, concerns, really most of what we put in this policy is guided by state statute or, prudent financial management. So no, unless anybody, has any comments or suggestions.
Great. One last opportunity, y'all. I see no hands raised, so thank you very much for the presentation and thank you for all of the hard work to get this done. I will move on to other matters. Item G, are there any other matters to discuss? I see none. All right. The next meeting date for the Finance and Planning Committee will be Tuesday, October 8th, 2024. At that meeting, we are slated to take action on the fiscal policy, on the investment policy, receive a sales and use tax forecast update, and hold our initial discussion on the 2025 RTD fiscal year budget. So read your documents and come prepared with questions because we're going to have a lot to talk about. Thank you so much for your work. I look forward to it. Thank you for letting me chair the meeting. We did it. I seek a motion to adjourn and we'll call the meeting closed.
So moved.
All right. We close this
Thank
meeting
you.
and adjourn it at 6:44 p.m. Thank you so much. Have a good night.